Hey, and welcome to Her Sex. I'm Dr. Leslie Wakefield. I'm a pelvic health physical therapist, and here we're going to dive into real stories from women about their personal journeys, as well as insights from experts on female sexuality. This podcast aims to go beyond the usual stereotypes, to unveil taboos, and to celebrate the diverse ways that women experience sexuality. Grab a seat. Let's take a peek behind the velvet curtain. Right. Hey, I'm Dr. Leslie Wakefield. I am a pelvic health physical therapist, and this is Her Sex podcast. I'm on today with Angela the Christian Sexpert. And that's all you need to know. Take it from there.
Hi, I'm Angela the Christian Sexpert. I talk all about sex and intimacy, primarily in Christian marriage, but I would say probably at least half of my followers are of no faith affiliation or would consider themselves evangelical. I often get told this is the sex ed that I should have received either in church or when I was younger or things like that. I am trying to sort of change the narrative from inside the house of evangelical culture, but like I said, I think everyone deserves quality sex education and deserves to have good sex. So much so, that's my tagline is go have good sex. So I am a sex and intimacy coach. I am a public speaker and apparently TikTok influencer, which is weird as a Gen Xer to say, I'm making making it big on the TikTok.
On the Googles.
Yes.
On TikToks.
Exactly. But I saw the damage of purity culture to evangelical women because I was so a million years ago when I was in college, good girls from small towns didn't go to school to be sex therapists. They went to school to get their MRS degree.
Oh my, that's shocking.
Exactly. So being a good girl from a small town, I graduated with my bachelor's in religion and psychology. And a few weeks later, got the MRS by getting married. Sorry, my puppy says, "Oh, we're talking. I'm joining."
Welcome, puppy.
And so got married, but I remained fascinated with human sexuality. Eventually joined, after I had my son, joined an online international women's ministry, saw the damage of purity culture, saw women struggling to have good sex lives with their husbands. And I was eventually asked to join the leadership team. And I said, you know what? I want to be part of the change. I want to help women have good sex. They deserve to have good sex lives. And things progressed quickly. I started my TikTok kind of on a whim. In late January. By Easter of that year, I had gone viral with a video at over 5 million views. And
I can tell you that makes sense. Honestly, I don't think there's many people with your background speaking to your audience with your particular message. I think actually it's usually quite different. And I'm sure that's controversial. I imagine you get a lot of support and also a lot of hate. I don't know how many of those views were, happy views or shocked.
Yes.
But
that's exactly how it is.
It's Her Sex podcast, so I think it's a much needed voice. I think it's a much needed narrative to kind of add to the pod. So good job.
Thanks. Yes, there's definitely a very stark divide between the hate comments and the supportive, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I found you comments. I get DMs almost daily. I got one yesterday from a woman that says, I love your content, but I'm afraid to comment on it because I'm afraid of people I know seeing me interact with your content. And all the while I've got a video trending on YouTube right now where I pissed men off and they're just calling me a fat whale. So it's you get one, you get the other.
Can I poke around on that just a little bit? Because from my understanding of your content, you are sex positive within, from your background, the bounds of Christian marriage. And so where is the problem with that in terms of your listenership?
So in evangelical culture, if you grew up around Christianity at all, you were probably exposed to something called purity culture. Purity, and this is another one of the ways I make Christians angry, is because I bash purity culture and I say purity culture is problematic. It needs to go. And people are like, oh, you just think that teenagers should be having orgies. And that's not what I said. Purity culture is a specific set of teachings that was popularized in the late 70s, early 80s, kind of as a reaction to the free love movement of the 60s. And it relies on shame and high control tactics to try and control teenagers' behavior. And shocker, it didn't work. And we actually know that women who were raised in purity culture are twice as likely to experience sexual dysfunction as women who were not. And because of the shame and high control tactics that were used.
And being a little bit more descriptive. So for myself, because I did not grow up in that, I have an idea of what you mean, but can you be specific about what is the message of purity culture that's intended to control sexual behavior of teenagers?
So there were teachings like just thinking if you having a stray sexual thought was lust and it was a sin. Noticing that someone was attractive was lust and it was a sin. And if you are watching the video of this, I am so sorry. My puppy just
wrestling her dog. It's like death match over here.
out. She is still a baby, and she's usually much better behaved on podcasts. Oh my goodness. So there would be lessons where the youth pastor would come in with a stick of gum and he would chew it up. And then he would spit it. He would give everybody gum, say, chew it up. All right, now spit it into your hand. If you don't go to your wedding night a virgin, this is what you are offering your future spouse. It's chewed up gum. Who wants that? And there was no consideration if somebody was being abused, right? It was, the focus was on the fetish. My mouth does not like the word. Idolization. Fetishization of virginity. So virginity was both idolized and fetishized within purity culture.
For both men and women, for boys and girls?
Boys primarily got the teaching, just don't think about sex. And when you get married, your wife will be there to fulfill all of your sexual desires. Girls were made responsible for a boy's sexuality. Girls were told, a boy's going to push your boundaries, so you have to make sure that you don't lead him on. You have to make sure that you don't let him push you too far. You can't wear a tank top because seeing your shoulders will lead a boy into sin, and you'll be responsible for his salvation. And so all of that pressure and responsibility was placed on sometimes girls as young as 10, 11, 12 years old. There were books written aimed at tweens who told girls, make sure that your shirt you're wearing doesn't show your belly button because your bellies are intoxicating to grown men.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm going to, I don't know, divert a little bit, but if the goal is to decrease sexualization, decrease sexuality, but you're actually sexualizing a 10-year-old. You're sexualizing young teens and making them responsible for grown men's sexuality. That seems like a lot of pressure to put on a child.
Yeah, there's not a lot of logic beyond the surface logic, because on the surface, when people don't think about it too hard, they're like, well, there's a lot of bad men and I don't want my teenage girl, I don't want a creepy man looking at her anyway.
Fair enough.
I want to protect her.
Right.
But you're not thinking that through to the conclusion. And so that becomes an issue. And so, it's putting all this pressure on the girls and it's telling men, just don't think about it. And your wife will be there to fulfill your sexual needs. Well, now this couple grows up and gets married. He's been told, just don't think about it. Your wife will be ready to fulfill your every sexual desire when you get married. And now they're married and she actually comes into the marriage and she is twice as likely to experience vaginismus on her wedding night, to discover on her wedding night that sex is, she can't even do it because it's so painful because of the psychological damage of all of these teachings.
So she's grown up actually I don't want to put words in your mouth, but fearing sexuality,
Yes.
avoiding aversion to sexuality
Yes.
in the hopes of being pure and ready for her future husband. But then how do you make that switch from, focusing so hard on avoidance of sexuality to all of a sudden being responsible for someone's every sexual need? And he's been waiting and I'm sure he's ready.
Exactly.
But maybe she's not. Is that what I'm understanding?
That is one of the big problems that I see on a daily basis. It's, it's this idolization, and it's their worth as a person is tied to their virginity, their status as a virgin. So if you aren't going to your wedding night a virgin, then you're just absolutely worthless. And then after you get married, the messaging in the church has been, well, God created men to need sex every 3 days. And if you don't give it to him, he's going to go find it elsewhere. That sort, if a woman's husband, I am part of the leadership team for that international ministry I mentioned earlier. We have 11 or 12,000 members now, international, women from all over the world. All right. We just had a conversation last week where this woman's husband is throwing temper tantrums if he doesn't get sex on a regular schedule, that he's complaining that she doesn't initiate sex often enough. And she says, well, I don't have an opportunity to initiate sex because if we go 2 days without it, he's complaining that it's been too long. And a woman had the audacity to come on there and say, well, men are just wired differently. And, I knew about this man who would keep track of how often he was having sex with his wife and rated each encounter in a notebook. And that you can't expect men to operate like women do. Excuse me? That's not. And she totally thought that was okay.
Tell me the rebuttal. What did you say?
I said that the only reason that anyone should ever be tracking how often you are having sex is for the purposes of procreation. Anything else is sexual coercion and abuse, period.
Okay. And what if the response is that is the wife's duties? I've heard that narrative. That's my responsibility. That's my duty. That's my role as a wife. That's not coercion. That's part of our arrangement of marriage. And he needs what he needs. And if I want to fulfill those needs and be a good wife, well, then, we need to get on the schedule.
That's why I am currently being called a fat whale who never gets any sex on YouTube. Because I made a video that says men do not need sex every 3 days. A need cannot require the use of someone else's body. Needs are required to sustain life. I do not use my husband's body to provide nutrition or water or sleep or clean me, right? Those are needs. You don't explode. Your penis does not explode in a shower of semen if you don't get an orgasm every 72 hours. And the logic just isn't there. All right.
Where did this idea come from? Because actually this is new to me.
As far as I can tell, in evangelical culture, this can be traced back to Dobson, which is the root of many evils in evangelical culture. Which is, again, another reason that I make half my target audience mad at me. But as far as I can tell, this can be traced back to evangelical teachers in the 80s and 90s. But realistically, it's just men telling on themselves, right? It's popular Christian authors telling on themselves. What do you mean you need sex every 3 days, sir? Are you telling me that you sexually abuse your wife? Are you telling me that you treat your wife badly if she doesn't put out every 3 days? How is that, in my faith, we have the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, and self-control. So how is that exhibiting self-control? That's not how it's supposed to work. There's nothing in the Bible that lines up with this 3-day rule. And it's bad teachers, bad theology that people are, again, not looking past the surface. They're accepting what they're being told from the pulpit and parroting it back and not looking any deeper at it. I was just on a podcast 2 weeks ago, and the woman said, prior to today, I would have agreed that men need sex, that, things like that. But everything you're saying, I can't think of a single rebuttal. You're right. That's not what the Bible says. I know. That's why I'm out here doing what I'm doing, because these teachings damage women. They damage. If a woman cannot say no to sex, she can never say yes. So if a woman is told that her husband needs to use her body every 3 days, or his immortal soul is in danger,
not really.
Just say no.
Is that actually what they're saying?
Yeah, they say that, if you don't give it to him every few days, he's going to look for it elsewhere, and he's sinning.
Oh, because she's still in control of his behavior sexually, right. Just like what we were talking about earlier with the purity culture.
Mm-hmm.
I sound like a dum-dum, but some of this is new to me.
No, I'm glad that you're asking these questions, because as someone who has lived in this culture for 20 plus years now, this is part of our everyday language. And yeah, it's part of what I'm fighting against, but I've been steeped in it so long that sometimes I forget, like, this language doesn't make sense to those who don't live this out every day, who aren't fighting against this every day.
So I'm familiar with your content. If anyone listening or watching is not familiar, I can unequivocally say you are sex positive. You are a woman that loves to have sex with your husband.
Yes.
And when you're describing some of the background sort of information that's being given to women or assumed to be true by women, it sounds like that perspective that you have, which is, I love having sex with my husband, and that's part of our relationship and our love together. It would be really hard to have that sort of feeling or that engagement with sex, or even your relationship, that intimate part of your relationship, if you felt like sex was a requirement. And to your point that you cannot say no. If a woman wants to enjoy, it seems like those two things would be fairly incompatible.
Absolutely. So two of the big things I say is, if a woman can never say no, she can never truly say yes. So if she feels in any way obligated to sexually perform, she is never free to explore her own sexuality. She is never free to express herself sexually, because she is always under this performative mandate to fulfill his sexual desires.
Question. In this background, in this setting, does that even matter? Is that something that's valued by women for women?
It depends on your specific subculture. So the ministry that my work, the Christian Sexpert, was born out of this ministry that I am a part of. And part of the reason that it was born out of that was because the ministry was sex positive. From the beginning, when I came, the ministry had already been established when I came in, and they were very much, sex is mutual pleasure. It is not a need for anyone. He does not need it every 3 days. If it's being weaponized against you, you need to get help. And so it definitely depends on the particular subculture that you are in within evangelical Christianity. There are sectors, and they're growing, who are more sex positive than others. But for the most part, it's going to be the narrative of, he needs it, she has to put it out, etc.
And why isn't she having fun? I just can't even imagine.
Right. But the thing is, when you go back to, when you actually look at what the Bible says, there's no model for sacrificial sex where she does it just because he needs it. It's mutual pleasure. The Song of Solomon in the book of the Bible is spicy. It's very spicy. It talks about oral sex. It talks about, let your spices flow. Let me drink your spices. I don't know what people think that means, but it's pretty clear. She's not talking about drinking frankincense. So, like, it's mutual pleasure. Is that you see in the Bible the woman initiating sex with her husband and saying, "I want to enjoy you." And so to go back to what the sort of originated all of this, one of the things that I say is healthy women in safe marriages don't turn down good sex for no reason. So if a woman is struggling with sex in her marriage, we can look at that framework and probably identify why she's not interested in sex. Healthy women, so there's no trauma, there's no hormonal imbalances, she's not pregnant or nursing, there's no structural issues, anything like that. Healthy women in safe marriages. So there's no abuse or coercion. Like, he's not telling her, "I need sex, you have to do this because it's a need for me." She feels safe in the marriage. Don't turn down good sex for no reason. So there's this narrative, even beyond evangelical culture, but in just general, that men are more sexual than women. And I don't think that's true. I think men are socially conditioned to be allowed and encouraged to express their sexual self, and women are condemned for expressing any sort of sexuality, right? If a woman expresses any hint of sexuality, she's a pick-me, or she's a whore, or some other horrible word. And no, it's just
sexy and appealing, but not sexual.
Right, exactly. Be sexy for the male gaze, because he needs to turn your sexuality into something, a commodity for his consumption. Make your sexuality into a commodity for his consumption, but don't be sexual and embrace your own sexuality. So if a woman isn't interested, she's not enjoying it, go back to healthy women in safe marriages don't turn down good sex for no reason. Women enjoy sex as much as men. We're just not allowed to express ourselves the same way.
And then how would you feel about something like libido mismatch, or, like you said, hormone shifts through a lifespan, pregnancy and breastfeeding? Like, we can say those are healthy, but they're different phases of a woman's life.
So libido mismatch, I think, is a cop-out for further investigation. It's not a cop-out, isn't exactly the right word. It's an excuse to prevent people from digging further into figuring out where the deeper issue lies, right? Because a lot of people don't understand that there's a difference between responsive desire and spontaneous desire. Stereotypically, men experience spontaneous desire. Stereotypically, women experience responsive desire. Spontaneous desire can be ready for sex anytime, anywhere, because it sounds fun, right? Responsive desire needs to be doing sexy things with their body before they realize, oh, I actually do like sex and want to have sex. And their brain just doesn't get with the program as quickly as spontaneous desire does. And because women stereotypically experience responsive desire, they think that they don't want sex as often as their husband does.
When really their way of experiencing attraction and arousal is different.
Exactly.
So if we're assuming that the stereotypically male format is the normal, then anything other than that, just by popular culture and what's in the narrative and what we hear and talk about, would then be less or not normal or
wrong. Precisely. And, like I talk about, and this goes along with, the fact that it takes women about 14 to 20 minutes of direct clitoral stimulation in order to orgasm, whereas most men typically orgasm in about 5.4 minutes. And so if a woman is not orgasming as quickly, they think there's something wrong with them. No, babe. What if you are what is the standard? What if you are what is normal and he's just too fast? What if he's the problem?
So I imagine that's not really subject of conversation. I know that there is some sex education depending on sort of orthodoxy level and which religion you are. Different religions have different programs in place to prepare new brides and new husbands. But in the evangelical world, where does that narrative, either side of it, even get spoken or come into awareness?
Not usually unless they find me. Honestly, so the Catholic Church has their natural family planning education, which is amazing. And they do, depending on the specific class, they may cover, the different orgasm rates and things like that. But in more wider evangelical culture, there really is no sort of education like that. It would be up to the parents, and if the parents never got education, it's just not there. I cannot tell you how many women look at me with the biggest eyes when I explain the orgasm rate difference. I had no idea that I thought I was broken because it takes me so long, and I feel guilty because it takes me so much longer.
Or I feel rushed, and
yes,
one more reason I'm not actually that interested. It's kind of stressful to try and get there in time.
Exactly. Which goes back to healthy women in safe marriages don't turn down good sex for no reason. If he's not that good at sex, if he's rushing you to your completion, it's no wonder that you're not that interested in sex.
So the picture that I'm getting, and then take it away again, but from my outside perspective, you have a very inside perspective. And, we've had kind of pre-conversations, and you've referenced other social media influencers that are in this sphere. And I was completely unaware and outside the box. So this has been, really good for me also to have a better understanding. But the picture that I'm getting, and I'm sorry if this is oversimplified, is we've got kids being told basically sex is bad. Boys, don't think about it, but when you get there, have as much as you want. And girls, you are the guardians of all sexuality, and anything sexual is shameful, and your virginity is the most prized thing. And then you get to marriage, and all of a sudden the woman has to figure out how to do that transition shift to not just sexual woman, but woman that's potentially performing on schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And, the guys, not pointing any fingers, they also have not had any of this education. They're in the same information kind of inundation. Like, it's all consistent messaging across the board, it sounds like, depending on your group. And so then you have women that don't understand the different types of sexual desire and arousal. They don't necessarily know their own bodies or the time course that it would take for their bodies to reach full arousal or orgasm. And you have young men that have also not received that education and feel potentially entitled and expectant of regular sex. And so then you end up, what sounds like a pretty significant mismatch between enjoyment and interest, and even potentially verging into coercion. And I mean, I have no qualms with saying there is such a thing as marital rape. And I do think that exists more often than we would like to acknowledge.
Marital coercion is rape, period. There's no two ways around that. And there's a difference between coercion because you didn't know any better, and once you learn, you want to do better and you work towards doing better.
Mm-hmm.
And coercion because you just are entitled and you use your faith as an excuse to. I have seen men repeatedly tell women, well, the Bible says you can't deprive me. And far more egregious in my eyes are the women who tell other women, the Bible says you can't deprive your husband. You have to have sex with him.
That's a good question. Like, I imagine you get some haters on your social media. How many would you say are women versus men? Because I imagine the message you're giving is controversial across the board and threatening across the board.
It is. Men don't typically attack my content. Men don't like my content, so they attack my appearance. If you are listening to this, I am a fat middle-aged housewife from Ohio. I am not, the typical 20-something beautiful sex educator that you see on Instagram. I am friends with her. Her username is Handy Mandy. Handy Mandy. She's gorgeous, and her content is amazing. But I'm and so men don't disagree with me they don't like what I'm saying because I threaten the state of their sex lives, so they attack my appearance. And I honestly do better. It's lazy. I have a mirror. I know I'm fat. This is nothing you are saying is news to me. And my sex life is still better than yours. I guarantee it. But the women are the ones who, if they disagree with my theology, they will be far more likely to come and say, well, the Bible says you can't deprive your husband. If you expect your husband to engage in emotional intimacy, then you need to be giving him sex. Okay, well, first of all, does your husband even like you? Like, why did you get married if not to build a life together? Do you not think this through? Do you not realize that someday your body's going to fail you and that sex will no longer be a part of your marriage? It might not happen for 50 years, but someday the sex is going to dry up because you're old and your bodies are going to give out. All that's going to be left is that emotional intimacy. So you can't, just because you're 30 and young and can perform on his schedule doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. My ADHD lost the plot. Women are absolutely, and I think part of the reason is because if they acknowledge what I'm saying, they have to take a hard look at what is happening in their own marriages, and that's uncomfortable.
And that might not be possible depending on the partner. I mean, if you threaten the fundamentals of a marriage, you're threatening the marriage itself. And I also understand that in many communities, that's not actually possible.
Absolutely.
Very difficult to do.
And I struggle with that on a personal level because, like, one of the things that I say a lot is you can have your personal convictions, but you don't get to call your personal convictions sin for everyone. So if you believe that God tells you that you have to have sex whether you want to or not, you're wrong, but okay. But you don't get to put that on everyone because, first of all, that's not biblical and it's not healthy. And there's more and better available to you, and I would love to show you, but you don't get to drag others into your misery with you to make yourself feel better about what you're forcing yourself to sit in. So it's hard to balance that compassion but also the no, you don't get to do that here.
You sound, not in a bad way, but you sound angry. I mean, I imagine you've seen it enough and you felt frustration enough.
It's when I started this, it truly was sort of on a whim. I knew I had been talking with the other leaders for the ministry, and I said, when my son grows up and he doesn't need me so much anymore, I would like to do this. And that was in late fall. And then in January, something came up again, and someone said, Angela, that should be your TikTok handle. It's the Christian Sexpert. And I was like, you're right.
You're so silly, but I like it.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, run over, and I'm going to reserve that name just in case I ever want to do something with it in the future. And they were like, to really make it on TikTok, you have to post like 4 times a day. And I was like, what?
Okay, I don't even have TikTok. That sounds so overwhelming.
But I started doing it literally on a whim because I was like, this sounds fun. Why not?
We have a lot to say too.
Right. And like the content truly does just write itself. But I started doing it on a whim, like literally just in my pajamas, recorded a TikTok and uploaded it one night. And like I said, that was late January. I gone viral by March. And then I realized, like, this is serious. Like I'm doing this. Like, I don't know if this podcast will go live, but before I do it, but in September, I'm speaking at a conference in front of 50,000 Christian women because of my TikTok content. So you could say it got pretty serious pretty quick.
Well, you could say people want to hear what you have to say.
Right. But when I started this, it was like, I want to talk about sex online, like silly little girl stuff to start. And then I started doing the work and I started working with coaching clients, and it's hard work. It's more than just making silly little TikToks. It's walking. One of my clients is being sexually coerced, and walking with her every month, trying to show her that it doesn't have to be this way. He is not entitled to your body. You are entitled to your no. You are entitled to boundaries. And it makes me angry knowing that my faith is being used to rape women. It makes me angry to know that my faith is being used to create sexual dysfunction in teenage girls who are going to grow up and get married in a couple years and not even be able to enjoy sex because of the pain in her body. And it makes me angry that men are lazy. Like, if you're going to insult me, like, work for it. It makes me angry that men can't even be bothered to try and intellectually disagree with a woman online, that they just attack her appearance. I have been fat all my life. I don't care, whatever. You can say whatever about my body. I've heard it all before. But it makes me angry that my followers see that they see these men attacking a woman for her appearance. And it reinforces the idea that my appearance is something for your consumption. And it's not.
Or it influences your value in some way.
Or it has anything to do with my expertise of the years of education and work that I have put into what I'm doing. It doesn't. It just happens to be the body I live in. Yes. And I often get, you're just an old, angry, bitter woman. I'm
happy to me in your videos. I mean, I don't know you personally, but you seem pretty pleasured.
Yeah. No, and absolutely. I've been married for over 20 years. We've had, our sex life has been great from the start. And people are like, well, you've just, but alternatively, I get creepy men who comment things like, oh, your husband must be so lucky to have sex whenever he wants it, or like, you guys have never struggled in your sex life. No, that's not true either. And that's weird. Why? That's weird. Don't make those comments either, guys. We went through a season after my son was born. I experienced lactation failure, and I was on so many supplements and drugs to try and produce enough milk that I was drier than the Sahara Desert. Because something else that women are not educated about, no one talks about the connection between prolactin and sexy hormones, and how prolactin actively suppresses the sexy hormones in your body. And you have to have a high level of prolactin to produce milk to keep your baby alive, right? And so we went through a year where it was painful when we even attempted it because of all of the drugs for the breastfeeding. And it was probably less than 5 times that year when I was on all of those drugs. And not once did my husband complain about his penis exploding, because it wasn't happening.
Living proof that that is false.
He was just happy that our son was there and because he and I both prioritized me producing as much milk as I could for him. That was something that was important to us. He was just happy that, I was doing the work to produce what I could for my son, not, milking him.
So you're a real human. What I'm hearing you say, you're a real human in a real human marriage. And it sounds like you and your husband have a high level of communication. I imagine.
So around sex. That's the thing too, is like, we are real humans. Our marriage is not perfect. We both have raging ADHD and raging childhood trauma. So we fight, things are crazy here. But yeah, at least when it comes to sex, we've always managed to communicate.
So can we add that to maybe some of the factors that would be affecting these marriages that we're talking about, these sexual relations that we're talking about, if people don't feel like there's open communication or comfortable to communicate, if there's shame around sex or sexuality, or there's even a lack of vocabulary, it would be pretty hard to even have some of these, even if you felt emotionally so connected that you wanted to broach these conversations with your husband. I imagine that would be challenging.
Yes. I get that one a lot, is women who want to have sex, who enjoy sex with their husbands, but they don't know how to communicate about it because, especially as Christians, any talking about sex is taboo. So like you said, there's no vocabulary for it. And also like people, what it comes down to is no one wants to feel rejected by their spouse. And there is a fear of, if I talk about this sexual thing to my spouse, they're going to think I'm too much. They're going to think I'm some sort of freak for wanting this thing, the sexual thing. They're going to think there's something wrong with me, and they will reject me because of, me wanting this or whatever. So one of the things that I talk about a lot with my clients is starting a sex journal, because it eliminates seeing that look of rejection on your spouse that you're so afraid of. Because if you do have a healthy marriage, if you do have a safe marriage, your spouse wants to know you. And what is intimacy, sexual intimacy? But at its base level, a deep knowing of your spouse, looking into the core of who they are and loving them, even if they think pineapple goes on pizza. You've clearly married someone who is deranged. Okay. But even then, the real intimacy is saying, I see your desire for pineapple on pizza and I love you anyway.
I get the sense you've had this conversation before.
My husband has worked in a few pizza shops, and I told you we are real people with real issues. Okay. I told you.
This level of intimacy that you're talking about, I mean, I think that's such a beautiful concept. I think, it seems like something pretty much anyone would enjoy, to have that level of intimacy with their partner, whether you're married or religious or not religious, just on its face as a concept, that kind of emotional connection and intimacy, I think for a lot of people is pretty ideal. And it seems like, again, I'm going to kind of loop back because my brain is stuck on it, but that seems really impossible to do if you're on a required sex schedule, or if you feel shame around your feelings of wanting sex, or inability to talk about the things you don't like and it hurts. I mean, those things seem like they would be really at odds. It would be very hard to have that level of intimacy. And if you're a spiritual person, full spiritual connection with someone, if you can't have those fundamental conversations, either with your partner or even within yourself because you lack the language.
Absolutely. And part of what I do in coaching and also talking about sex journals is to kind of give people the language, first of all, giving women especially the knowledge of, like, you're allowed to set boundaries. You're allowed to have sexual boundaries.
Says who? Does the Bible say?
Yeah, there is actually evidence in Song of Solomon of her setting a boundary and him honoring it. So there is specifically a passage where he's coming and he's knocking on her door, and she says, I don't want to get up and answer the door right now. I'm not in the mood. And he doesn't stand there and continue to knock and say, the Bible says you can't deprive me. He says, okay. And he walks away. So there is very clearly evidence of him respecting that boundary. there. And, and beyond that, we can start getting into theological issues about like husbands are called to love their wives as Christ loved the church. And, Jesus not forcing women into sex they don't want, like there's a whole theological thing there. But working with women to give them the language of you're allowed to have boundaries around sex. You're allowed to say, first of all, to say no if you don't want sex. I talk a lot about like the Fry's model of consent. Consent needs to be freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So you can get 10 minutes into foreplay and say, you know what, I'm not interested.
Say it again and say it slower.
The ADHD takes over and it just
No, but it's so valuable. I want to say it again. I want to have it slow and pace, and I want everyone who's listening to be able to hear what you're saying.
So consent has to follow the Fry's model of consent. Consent must be freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. See, if I go slow, I don't remember them all.
Yeah, but it's so important.
It is so important. So, and like reversible, like people talk about scheduling sex. You can't give future consent for sex. You cannot say, I will have sex with you on Thursday. You don't know if you will be in the mood for sex on Thursday, or maybe your period will show up unexpectedly and you'll be gushing blood and, that some people enjoy it then, but not everybody. And so like you cannot give future consent. So you can say, well, we can plan to spend time together on Thursday and we'll see what happens. But I need to be able to, in the middle of penetration, say, nope, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Something's wrong. I'm done. And have that respected without any sort of emotional blackmail attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
Emotional blackmail could be things like physical aggression, not necessarily directed at you, but things like huffy sighs, rolling over, punching his pillow to get it into the right shape, or things like that. Emotional withdrawal, being cold and emotionally towards you, or even things like, well, I'm sorry, I'm such a bad husband, I just want to have sex with my wife. That's emotional manipulation. That's not okay. And so if any of those areas of consent are not being respected, that's a red flag. And so not women who are raised in purity culture and evangelical culture are not often given this sort of language to know that in order for you to be your most sexual self, the first thing that needs to happen is your no be respected. The first thing.
You have to be able to say no in order to say yes.
Yes. I have to continually remind some people that you are never going to start enjoying sex until your no for it is accepted. You cannot enjoy sex if you do not feel safe to say no.
Yes. Question. If a man had to have sex every 3 days, could he masturbate?
That is depending on the couple's belief system. So the Bible does not specifically address masturbation, but the Bible does address lust. And so you really need to have conversations about, are you able to masturbate without lust? Is this something that you can do without lusting? Because the Bible does clearly define lust as a sin, and lust, not everyone is clear, because again, going back to purity culture defined lust as having a stray sexual thought, right? Oh, that girl is hot. Oh, you're lusting. Noticing is not lust. Lust is the desire to possess and consume. Lust commodifies someone else's sexuality for your own pleasure. Which
Puppy.
My puppy is being a puppy. She's usually much better behaved.
So from my understanding, even in the context of marriage, solo masturbation, depending on your belief structure, might still be unacceptable.
It could be for some couples. Some couples may have a history with pornography usage. And so she could be concerned about him.
Casey, you've got a puppy. I've got an air conditioning unit.
There may be a history of him using pornography. And so she may be concerned that if he starts masturbating, that's going to be a slippery slope into opening the door to pornography again, which is a really valid and real concern. And so when we talk about masturbation in the context of marriage, humans by nature want a list of black and white do's and don'ts. We want to know what's acceptable and what's not. How far can we get to the line before we're going to fall over it? But that's not what I see in the Bible, because when I'm talking to my clients, because the Bible tells me, right? Like the Bible didn't specifically talk about the act. It talked about your heart and what your motivation in engaging with the act. And so when I'm talking to a couple about whether or not he would be fine to masturbate, I want to know, well, why can't you go more than 3 days without masturbating or using your wife to masturbate yourself? Because are you actually engaging in sexual intimacy, or are you just using your wife's body to masturbate, first of all? Second of all, why can't you go more than 3 days? What's happening in your brain? Do you have a pornified mindset where sex has become a commodity that you rely on to manage your emotions? Because that sounds a little bit like using drugs to me. That doesn't sound like real sexual intimacy. I was coming up with every other word except for intimacy there. Got it. Sexual integrity, sexual performance. That doesn't, if you need it every 3 days, why? What's going on there? What's going on in your brain? What is the reason?
So I think this is so interesting to me as someone who is not associated, affiliated, active in a religion. And that's, TMI on Leslie. But it's very interesting to me because when I hear you talk about some of these, I'm like, she's like super liberal and like down for anything and all about all the sexy all the time. But the truth is, you really are coming from a very informed and faith-based perspective within your Christian culture, which I think really adds a lot of validity to what you're saying for the people within that culture. I mean, I imagine that is really helpful to know there's someone that does share their most fundamental belief systems, not just the letter of the law, but the heart of the law. Like what is the goal of these laws or rules or recommendations? And it seems like you really do come from such an informed spiritual perspective. It would be pretty hard for somebody from within your religion, it seems like to me, to say, oh, well, she's just not faithful enough. She's just out there wanting all sex all the time and she's too worldly. And I've heard you, we're not doing it right now in the context of this podcast, but girl, I've heard you like rap scripture. I mean, you know the Bible. You're not coming from an uninformed or flippant perspective on this.
So my literal degree is religion and psychology. My degree is in this stuff. So I have studied this for over 20 years. My husband and I have been leaders in churches. We have been pastors. Like we know this. This is the thing that gets me. People are like, well, you just don't know the Bible. It's my literal job. This is my job to know the Bible. In fact, I know the Bible better than you do because I have looked at the historical and cultural context of that verse that you were misquoting, and you're still wrong. So
can we just put like a little sign for you, and it's going to be a piece of paper, and you're going to hold it and say, you're wrong.
Yeah,
you're wrong. And just to save your breath, like when you're having these debates.
Yeah. I feel like I've never even seen the show, but like that, was it like Ron Burgundy, like that meme? Like I have a note or whatever. I have a letter that says I can do what I want. Like I feel like that's me a lot with people, because people are like, well, they try and say, well, God created men to need sex every 3 days. Well, really? Have you what verse are you using to back that up? Because when I look at the Bible, I see where the ancient Jewish law said that if the country, the nation was at war, that Jewish men could not lay with their wives. That the expectation was that Jewish soldiers did not have sex with their wives while there was a war on. And wars were not done and over in 3 days back then. Wars were for months and years. So if these same men who are out here saying, men, God made me to need sex every 3 days, are the same men who are going to complain about men these days are weak. Where are the real men? Tell me, Craig.
Sorry to all the nice guys named Craig out there.
Where are the real men who went off to Jewish war and didn't have sex for 3 years? Where are they? So
I would pay to see you in a debate. I would pay for it. I mean, we might not have to. If we can get the guy on, we'll do it here. When we planned this interview, honestly, like we got our heads together and we probably had enough content for like 4.
At least.
So I guess the only thing, if I can loop back to one concept before we call it a day, and then maybe we get to do this again if you're open to it. I want to just get your take for a second. We touched on it really lightly, but we didn't have a chance to dive deep on the concept of shame around sex and how that gets, we talked about purity culture and we used the word shame a couple of times, but can you talk about how shame gets built in to purity culture and then how that can have an influence on what otherwise might be a healthy marriage later on?
Right. So one of the big things that purity culture taught was any sort of straight sexual thought was lust. And lust is sin. Sin is to be ashamed of. Right? You should be ashamed to be engaging in sin because that means that you lack self-control. Right. And because it had defined any sort of stray sexual thought as lust and therefore sin, teenagers have all of these hormones coursing through their bodies. You're literally fighting biology at that point. You are fighting the way God designed them to develop to try and control their behavior. And I get it. Like, you don't want teenagers just out having sex and teenage pregnancies. And, like, I understand the motivations of where this all started. I do. I'm not a monster. But the way that it was approached was horrific. And so you cannot, and alternatively, this is a great one. One of my friends, when you think about how tweens and teenagers acquire clothing, they don't have money to go out and buy their own wardrobe. They have to rely on their parents to buy their clothes for them. And so one morning, my friend came down the stairs wearing the same shorts that she had been wearing all summer. Her dad exploded. What are you doing wearing those shorts? You are not leaving the house looking like some kind of hooker in those shorts with your butt hanging out of those shorts. She'd been wearing them for months. Her body grew, and her parents failed to notice that her body had grown and failed to provide her an appropriate clothing. So she put on what had fit her for months, not being aware, because she was a literal child. She was just thinking about going out to play in the yard with her siblings, not thinking that she's looking for sexual attention at 12 or 13. But her father accused her of looking for sexual attention via her clothing at 12 or 13. Her father sexualized her.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, she felt shame for something she had no control over. She couldn't buy her own clothes. She couldn't control that her legs had gotten longer and her shorts hadn't. She had no control over that. But she's supposed to get married and flip a switch with the placing of a ring and be a sexual goddess?
And the flipping of the switch, just to be super like literal and explicit, is no sex, sex bad, don't think about sex, to have sex, sex on schedule, and you're going to love it because now you're married.
And honestly, whether she loved it was irrelevant.
Yeah.
There was never a discussion of female pleasure in purity culture.
Thank you for adding that. I missed that piece.
Yeah, there was never a discussion of female pleasure in purity culture. It was men need it. Men will push you to go further than you should. You have to keep him satisfied, but you can't be too sexual and cause him to sin. But there was never any discussion of the female's pleasure. Her virginity was a commodity for his consumption. It was his reward for making it to the wedding day.
And then what's left? After your most prized possession is now passed and given up.
A lifetime of...
Which makes me crazy, like giving up. I don't like that phrase, but you know where I'm going with it.
Yeah. Do you know one of the most bonkers things I heard said from a pulpit one time? I saw a clip.
I'm afraid
of a pastor preaching a sermon from a pulpit with his whole chest, said that having sex on your wedding night and breaking her hymen, and that blood is a symbol of the covenant, of a spiritual covenant. That blood from the breaking of her hymen was necessary for a sign of this spiritual covenant. And I have never wanted to reach through my phone and shake someone as much as I wanted to that man.
Just from like an anatomy perspective, as a pelvic health PT, I can tell you that most women's hymen has been disrupted or stretched or is mobile enough to potentially not bleed during penetrative sex by the time she reaches her late teens and 20s, just through activity. And that you can even have an intact hymen after having had penetrative sex, because it is not like some tarp that covers the opening. It's actually a flexible piece of tissue. So when you say that, it makes me think that now I have young women who are being hurt in order to bleed, in order to have a spiritual moment during their wedding night, which is upsetting.
And the other thing is so in, what is it? Come as you are, maybe?
That came across as really sassy.
As well you should, because I told you it was bonkers.
Yeah.
What I think it's come as you are. She addresses the fact that if a woman is bleeding during her first penetrative experience, it is statistically less likely that it's her hymen being broken versus lack of sufficient foreplay, so the tissues are not sufficiently lubricated, so it's probably more coming from like
Trauma?
Cuts
Yeah.
than some sort of hymen spiritual BS.
So now I'm getting to the part where you feel angry sometimes. I understand. I'm not exposed to a lot of these messages, and I think, some of the people listening to this are going to be like, yeah, I heard that too. And the rest of us are going to be like, what?
Yeah.
What? So I think from both sides of the perspective, I can understand why when you as the Christian sexpert hear enough of these stories, you do have compassion. Of course, you have the very fundamental belief in your religion, but I can understand why you start to get a little angry.
I mean, there's so many levels of things that you can be angry about, like lack of basic anatomy education and trying to like take bad education and make it theological. Just, are you okay? Did you have nothing else that you could talk about from the pulpit? No other topics.
I assume that in a lot of your content, you sort of do rebuttals to these things, and you demystify some of these things, and just by virtue of existence, you remove some of the taboo. Where can people find you?
I am the Christian Sexpert across all platforms, and my website is thechristiansexpert.com.
And if you'd be so kind, may I post links to all your stuff in the show?
Absolutely. I would love that.
Would you be interested in coming back for another interview? Because I got you on video.
Yes.
I know you say it. We all know you said it.
100%. I would love to do another. This was amazing.
Is that a coercive question because you're on the spot? Because everyone's watching.
I have no problems with boundaries. In fact, one of my friends told me last night that I am boundaries goals. So
Life goals for boundaries. Angela, the Christian Sexpert.
yes.
All right, awesome. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me.
I will make sure to post your bio and all your links. I know that there's going to be a lot of people really interested, whether we are Christian or observant or not. I think what you have to say spans across a lot of different religious backgrounds, depending on the orthodoxy level. And I think it's really valuable conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.